The Virgin Suicides by Sofia Coppola was released on April 21st, 2000, but was derived originally from the best-selling debut novel authored by Jeffrey Eugenides, whereas Moonlight, unlike the other film, was authored and came directly from the director Barry Jenkins and was released October 21st, 2016. The coming-of-age genre is centered around the growth of the protagonist or protagonists from their youth to adulthood. Typically, coming-of-age films skip between past, present, and future. This genre is typically fixated on internal monologue and dialogue rather than action. Now, to answer the question given to us, which is, to what extent do coming-of-age films differ according to cultural context? So, the cultural background or setting in The Virgin Suicides and Moonlight influences the characters' life choices throughout the film and how they deal with those problems that they have to tackle to get through life. I will be covering two coming-of-age genres that both fall under American culture. The first film goes by the name of The Virgin Suicides. This film was shot in Toronto in 1998, but the fall setting of the film took place in Detroit, Michigan, and was Sofia Coppola's debut feature. During the production of the film, they were given $6 million, and the shooting of the film took a month to complete. In the end, they received $10.5 million in total. The other film, by the name of Moonlight, also being from the coming-of-age genre that falls under African American culture, which is an aspect of the traditional American culture but slightly different. The movie Moonlight was directed by Barry Jenkins, which he himself came up with. This film was shot and also took place in Miami, Florida in 2015, and it is known as Jenkins' most prized masterpieces to not only himself but also for the great deal of people. The intention in the making of The Virgin Suicides was to show a glimpse of how growing up from a girl to a woman can be very stressful and overwhelming with obstacles, especially focusing on how teenagers are more prone to becoming depressed and suicidal. The director also delves into how adults view suicide as something that is stupid, that it's not a problem in society. While the intention behind the creation of Moonlight was to give a light to how difficult it can be for someone to grow up gay, this can be reflected by the mistreatment, harassing, and disregarding that he had to deal with in his African American society. The director intended to show the audience that even if you are gay, there will always be someone supporting you, and that later on you'll find the happiness that you never thought that you could have. Now, as for this execution of both of the films, going first is The Virgin Suicides, which did receive some harsh critique despite it being fairly popular. As said before, the production of the film uh, was given 6 million and then after received 10.5 million as their worldwide gross. Whereas for Moonlight, the execution of the film was both fascinating and emotion bound. The film production was only given $4 million as their budget and made an astounding $65.3 million because of how widespread both the film and message became. In conclusion, the obstacles and resolution of the characters in both The Virgin Suicides and Moonlight are influenced by the setting, but most of all by the cultural background in which they live in. The protagonists of The Virgin Suicides are the teenage Lipson sisters, also known as Lux, Mary, Cecilia, Therese, and Bonnie. They are forced or ensnared into the following rules of their strict parents' household. After having multiple suicide attempts from Cecilia and finally killing herself, the household became that of a cage. The girls were only allowed to go to school and home and nowhere else. Society thinks of girls as objects, especially the boys, in which the film portrays them through toxic masculinity. Their family is dysfunctional and is not allowing for the girls to enjoy their growing up into adults. But most importantly, they begin to have an internal struggle between themselves, and their wish for freedom becomes to the point where suicide is taken into consideration, essentially taking it to the extreme. The protagonist of Moonlight is Chiron, an African American child who lives in the ghetto and drug-riddled environment. Throughout the film, he is judged for being gay and even harassed to the point where he receives injuries. In the film, Chiron faces society which turns on him in the worst way imaginable, even going to the lengths of having his mom become an addict because of the environment in which they live in. He even has times where he has an internal struggle based on his sexual preference and his emotions. Chiron goes to the lengths of bottling in his emotions, but through doing so is able to persevere in life regardless of the situation that he's put in. The virgin suicides revolves around American culture. This links to how they live in the suburbs and are either middle or high class. The one thing that the girls strive for the most is the wanting of freedom to live and love. In this scene, Trip Fontaine and Lux Lisbon are having sexual intercourse in the middle of the football field. Fast forwarding into the morning, Trip wakes up before Lux and leaves her by herself in the field, later on having Lux wake up and soon realizing that Trip was missing and had left her. She then grasped that he had used her for his own personal gain. The mise en scène showcases the setting being nighttime, within the light being dark and yet but not yet too dark, to the point where there is specks of flashes of light. As she wakes up, everything is lit up by the sun, allowing for bright and warm lighting. Now, fast forwarding later on into the film, we can see that um, Cecilia, Lux, not Cecilia, Lux has persuaded the boys to get into the house to go and meet the other Libson sisters, while Cecilia waits around in the car. As the boys are going down into the basement, they come across what they think is the body of one of the Lisbon sisters. After seeing her hanging, they run up the stairs later to find another body on the floor, eventually leaving the house and not looking back. In the next scene, you can see four medics grabbing the girls and putting them into ambulances, and two other police officers going inside to investigate to see the reason why the girls had committed suicide. And then finally, going into the part where they open a garage, they find out that Lux had killed herself by carbon monoxide because she had left the car on while she was in there, and there was no way of her to get any oxygen. Moonlight is based on an African American culture that takes in the setting of the ghetto, also known as the living typically in the lower class. Sharon's only desire during the course of the film is to be accepted by society for who he is, and to be able to live happily away from the hood where his mom had become addicted to drugs in. In this part of the film, Sharon goes to the beach with his role model Juan. Juan then proceeds to teach Sharon how to float on water and swim. Having this moment with Juan was something that Sharon always wanted to do, eventually forming a father-like relationship with Juan. This marks the first time which Sharon is somehow baptized or submerged underwater, resulting in a transition from childhood to adolescence. After he's bullied by other students and then making love with his friend Kevin, later on being fought by the same Kevin because of the social pressure put onto him by the bullies, he is then helped by a teacher and talked to by the principal or advisor about the situation until he eventually breaks down. Soon after, he's seen submerging his face into water, which marks the second time in which Chiron, instead of transitioning right away, it is forwarded into where he's at school, where he pummels Terrell, the bully, and is arrested for it. Then forwarding into his adulthood, he's having a bad dream of his mother yelling at him like she had done in the past, which he wakes up and immediately submerges his face in water one last time, to signify both the end of the transition of growing up, but also serves as a marker for his final transformation into being like the role model that he had at the time.